Okay, I had promised somebody I would run through my flow for them to show them how my system was pumped. I can't remember who it was, but I'm going to put this up anyway. Each one of my beds is filled off this 2-inch pipe. Each one of them has a ball valve on it, so I can adjust how much is going into it, so I can control how quickly or how slowly the bed's filled. Each one of them has an auto-siphon. All of my auto-siphons have 1-inch standpipe, 4-inch gravel guards, and a 2-inch bell. Now I set my water height to remain at about 1.5 inches in the bottom. I just drill holes around the bottom, 3/4 inch hole, 5/8, 3/4. I can't remember what it is, but we'll call it 5/8. It looks closer to that. And just drill them all the way around, and that works perfect to break my siphons. I don't need to add any tubes or anything else. I've got enough there that when the water level hits it, it breaks. Then I just put my bell, all of my bells are cut so that between the top of the standpipe and the top of the inside of the bell, there's only about 3/4 inch. That way that air gap is no bigger than any air gap throughout the system, and it just seems to me like it helps start the siphon faster. If I have a real big air gap in there, a real big gap between the top of the standpipe and the inside of the bell, it seems like it takes forever for a siphon to get going. This way the siphons get going really fast. I would cut it down even lower, but it was working fine at that height, so I left it there. And then I just put the little clean out test caps on there. They fit loose, they're easy to pull out and drop in, just to help try to keep some excess junk out of them. At least that way I don't have to clean this kind of stuff out of the bells. Okay, but anyway, from that point they all drop down through using the 1-inch electrical fittings with the O-ring, if you can see that, the O-ring up in there. The female's on the inside, the male's on the outside with the O-ring. Male pushes through, I tighten the female down to compress on the male. Then all of mine have an elbow here, at least 190. I found that helps start a siphon so much faster as well. I had to do it to connect to my drain on these anyway, but even before all my system, or all my grow beds, once the standpipe exited, it had a 90 on it with at least a short piece of pipe, and that seemed to get the siphons going faster as well. Then here I've got my 90 for my siphon to help create the siphon. I've got another 90 down into a 3-inch drain pipe. All of the beds, auto siphon, drain to the 3-inch pipe. 3-inch pipe comes all the way down to my buried sump. It dumps into the sump. Okay. Now in the bottom of the sump there is a 2250 gallon per hour pump, 2,250 gallons per hour. Now that's rated at, actually on this pump it was rated for 3 foot ahead, it was 2250. It was 2250 from 0 to 3 foot, and from there it started going down. With the water level that's in the sump to the water level in my tank and where I'm pumping the water up to, it's got about 6 foot lift, which at that height I think it was still 1,900 and something to 2,000 gallons per hour, so that was plenty sufficient for me. It'll even keep up when I add more grow beds, because right now I have a tremendous amount of backflow. Speaking of the backflow, the 2250 pumps up through a 1-inch tube, or 1-inch pipe, same exact manner, through the same exact manner, same way I do all my 1-inch pipes. It's got the 1-inch electrical fittings and the O-ring going in. I've got my little Venturi in here that oxygenates everything, but I also have, if you notice the 2-inch pipe out here, that's just an overflow. It goes in, it elbows back up inside the fish tank, and it comes up to a height of that I want my water level at, and then I have that cut off inside the tank. That way the water will overflow that and drain right back into the sump rather than overflowing my tanks. It'll go past the height of this tube, drop right back down into the sump. That way my sump never runs dry, so my pump stays cool and everything else, but it allows me to run with the constantly running pump. It's basically a Chift Pist setup. Okay. Then since I only have 2 tanks hooked up at the moment, have a 3-inch right here. Sunglasses. Okay, sorry. Have a 3-inch tube back here. It's hooked up with uniseals through the IBCs. Let's see if we can see that up here. If you can see that, there's a uniseal around the 3-inch IBC, or the 3-inch PVC. Comes out to an elbow. I use the electrical PVC because it's UV resistant, which the white is not. You have to do something to help protect your white PVC from the UV rays, and it's cheaper. Plus, it also comes with the connector on one end of each pipe, so it saves you in connectors. If you buy the electrical sweeps and 90s, they're just as cheap as the white ones are, and they have a connector on one end and slide right in on the other end. So, and if you goof up and mess up, you can always cut the connector off and use it to connect two pieces together. Anyway, so I have a 3-inch that goes down and connects the two IBCs. Now this secondary IBC, the second IBC is the one that actually has the fish in it. I've got grates over the input and the outtake, the input being the 3-inch that we just talked about. Now this 2-inch goes through electrical connection with the float valve gasket. It will eventually be to a solids lift overflow off the bottom. Right now, with the size of my fish, I didn't want them getting sucked up, so I don't know how well that's going to show. But I've got a 2-inch pipe that runs down to the bottom of the PVC, and the last 8 or 9 inches or so, I drilled a ton of 1/8-inch holes through. It gives me plenty of flow going through out to my grow beds, and that's what supplies my grow beds. Okay. It goes from what will be a solids lift overflow out to the 2-inch PVC that goes down through, and it's teed off to each one of the grow beds to their ball valve and the little piece of pipe that just helps with the splatter. Okay, and that is pretty much how it is. My entire system is set up. Now I can't quite see it, but solids lift overflow is set up in the typical manner. The 2-inch comes through the side of the IBC. I've got a 2-inch T right there. The upper half of the T, or the section that's sticking up, it sticks above the water level, just so a siphon will never be created. Then the other portion goes down to the bottom of the tank. Solids lift overflow. And I've been out working on, the reason for the tarp is I don't have a lid yet. I've been out working on getting this thing fenced around to help kill off the light to the tanks, to try to kill the algae that's in the tanks. If you can see, there's that overflow I was talking about that goes right back to the sump. As the water gets up to a certain height in this tank, instead of overflowing the tank itself, it flows back down into the sump. And as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of water going back down through that 2-inch overflow. So that pump is pumping way more into this one tank than what I need. But as I expand and add more tanks, I'm going to split off and have 2 fills coming off of that one pump, just to aid in circulation. So, and if you can see all the air bubbles being created by the venturi over there, it does plenty good enough to oxygenate both these IBCs, because all the water coming in from that sump is super aerated right there, circulates in this tank, comes around to the flow between the 2 tanks, which, since water always seeks a level, and water's constantly flowing out of the other tank to the grow beds, water's constantly flowing from this tank to the other tank to level the 2 tanks out. This one's always a little bit higher than the other one, just because it's not an instantaneous flow, and the grates I had to keep the fish from going into the connection between the 2 tanks prevent some water flow as well. So at any rate, that venturi does great. Just really super oxygenated water from this tank goes through the overflow, or through the connection between the two tanks into the other tank and keeps that water plenty well oxygenated for the fish in that tank, which are fingerlings right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 280 to 300 of them. I haven't really noticed many dead, but I'm sure some have died since I set the system up. So, and I took a little over 50 out to sell to that guy that needed fish to get his system going. So I wasn't really going to be in the business of selling anymore. But that's how my system's set up. It's a Chift Pist system. Chift is constant height in fish tank. Pist is pump and sump tank. So this way I have pretty much a constant height in my fish tanks. They're not ebbing and flowing as the beds fill up and ebb and flow. Fish tanks stay constant all the time, but water is constantly flowing through both fish tanks. The pump is in the sump tank, and with this kind of system, your sump tank always needs to be lower than your grow beds, so that you can use gravity to supply the grow beds and gravity to empty the grow beds into the sump tank. And then all you need is one pump to pump up into the fish tanks. It's a Chift Pist and a chop. I haven't figured out what the difference is yet, because the chop, I forget the chop constant height, one pump, something like that. I know the OP stands for one pump, but that's the way that my system is set up. It's a Chift Pist. Constant height in the fish tanks, one pump in the sump tank, or pump in sump tank. And as you can see, my vegetables are doing pretty good. I just planted a lot of these about a week and a half or so ago, a week and a half to 2 weeks or so, except for this last bed that I planted about a month and a half ago. And it was my emergency system that I set up and to enable me to get the, man, those tomatoes are all over the place. Tomatoes down there, tomatoes in there. They're just all over, and still blooms all over the place too. But to enable me to get some fish outside, because my indoor system was getting overcrowded. And I still need to get a wrap around these last two tanks that I'd cut different from the way I cut the other ones. I changed the way I decided to cut them after I'd made my emergency system. So the two that were part of the emergency system, I just slid over into line, and I'm going to get them covered up before long here. Need to, because the algae's doing pretty bad in a couple of things. But that's the system.